We start with the enthusiasm gap. U.S. Congressman Elijah Cummings, a Democrat from Maryland. U.S. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz is a Democrat from Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got news for you. Just breaking in, the Newsweek poll just came in. I don't know if this is good news or bad news, Congresswoman. I'll start with you. The numbers are dead even now in what we call the generic vote. Are you going to vote Republican or are you going to vote Democrat this fall? Dead even now. Of course, knowing history, that's bad news for the Democrats because the Republicans have like a built-in 3% because the way the vote gets proportioned. Your thoughts? How's it look right now for your party, Congresswoman?
Well, obviously, we're facing a challenging environment, both because of the economy, but also traditionally a midterm election like this one, the party in power loses seats. But race by race, I mean, the generic ballot is one thing, but when you go head-to-head with their extreme right-wing nominees versus our moderate to conservative incumbents, our members are really doing very well, both in terms of their average cash on hand being astronomically more larger than their opponents, and also they're being really in the midst of what their constituents want them to be doing.
If I was worried about getting the Democratic vote out, Mr. Cummings, I'd worry about the fact that tomorrow in Washington, maybe 100 to 200,000 people, most of them Republicans, are going to show up for Glenn Beck and Sarah Palin, jumping up and down, doing hosannas over them, excited with unbelievable enthusiasm about voting in this coming election, and I'm waiting for the next Democratic rally with 100,000 or 200,000 people in this town. When's it going to come?
I think first of all, I think the Democrats have got to use that rally and the statements of Glenn Beck and others to remind our voters that we cannot take the rights and the opportunities that we have for granted, and that this president is doing everything in his power, and this Democratic Congress is too, to bring hope as opposed to just having people say nope to America. And clearly, I think we can turn that around. In other words, I think that this, what's going to happen tomorrow with regard to Mr. Beck is going to backfire. But we have to do our part to make sure it backfires.
Well, it's using let me stay on that word backfire, because in this case it's not using terms like backfire because it has to deal with cars, but I'm thinking about firepower. It's not so much a stretch to say that this crowd that's around Beck includes people like Sharon Angle who want to be able to use what they call Second Amendment remedies if they don't like what you folks are up to. In other words, gunplay. That's what she says. Use your gun if you don't like Congress and the way they're voting. I mean, this is worse than, the Civil War. We're talking about people talking up insurrection.
And they also
want to be able to,
and they also say repeal the 14th Amendment, repeal the 17th Amendment. And so, they are, Debbie mentioned it a moment ago, I think we've got some folk, Tea Party folk, Republicans, who are out of sync with the average American, and most Americans are in the middle. And I think that the voters are beginning to wake up, but the question that we have to ask, Chris, is who is on your side? And I think clearly the answer to that is that the Democrats and President Obama.
You know what's weird, Congresswoman? If George W. Bush had gotten his way and privatized Social Security and tied it to the stock market, your constituents would be 100% Democrats now. 100%, because they'd be looking at their 401k shriveled to nothing. I'm sorry, they'd be looking at their Social Security checks shriveled to nothing because they'd be based on the Dow Jones. I watch that Dow every day because I got some money in the market. Imagine if that's the only money you have and it ties to your Social Security. If Bush had won, the Democrats would have ironically be better off politically now, because the voter right now, the older voter and voter about to be old, would say, wait a minute, I can't trust the Republicans with my money.
Well, like Elijah just mentioned, that's the choice that we're going to be talking about throughout this fall campaign, because the new direction that we've taken this country in, turning the economy around and creating jobs, and also preventing privatization of Social Security and Medicare becoming a voucher program, which is what their leadership has proposed, is really a stark contrast. But you mentioned the 200,000 that may or may not be on the mall tomorrow. The 200,000 people that matter tomorrow are the 200,000 200,000 activists who are going to be knocking on doors tomorrow for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee's National Day of Action. We will do 200,000 door knocks tomorrow all across America, Chris, because our grassroots engine is second to none. We've won 7 special elections in a row, turning voters out. We do that far better than the Republicans. So between our issues, our candidates, and our ability to turn voters out, we are going to have a successful election day, or at least certainly better than most people in Washington are thinking we're going to have on November 2nd.
Let's both of you talk about now the voters who always show up at the polls, the older voters. The AARP has census numbers out now that show that most people depend on Social Security for their basic livelihood. I think these numbers are conservative, by the way. 37% of people aged 60 to 65 depend on it for 50% or more of their income. It goes up significantly. By the time you reach 80 in this country, you're lucky to live so long, Congressman. Basically, you're relying on Social Security. Your savings are pretty much worn out. Whatever you started with, no matter what kind of a nest egg you had, you're really living on that check that comes in once a month. Democrats created Social Security. Republicans have challenged it, especially under Reagan and since. Isn't this an issue that should basically drive most older voters to vote Democrats?
It should do that. Remember, just yesterday, Leader Boehner talked about still the privatization of Social Security. And you just made the best argument against that. And the fact is that if they have their way, that's exactly what will probably happen unless we're able to stop them. And so clearly our seniors should be with us. But there's one other thing, Chris, that you haven't mentioned. We also have a person in the White House who I think can help us. The White House was very surgical with regard to the way they ran their campaign for president. I think he's got to look at each and every district and say, okay, what can I do to help these voters? Keep it in mind, in a state like Georgia, the African-American vote almost doubled. And if you go to any place, Chris, and look at polling numbers, 95% of the African-American voters are still much in favor of Barack Obama. So they want him to be successful. Now he's got to use that and make sure that those surge voters surge again in 2010.
Well, here's a thought about the presidential election coming up in a couple years. Here it is, the Republicans, subpoena power. Darrell Issa, the congressman from California, can't wait, he says, to get a hold of subpoena power. If the Republicans win a majority in the House, they will own that subpoena power. Former Clinton White House counsel Lanny Davis just told Politico, quote, I actually think it will be even worse than what happened to Clinton because the animosity these people feel towards Obama. Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, could it be that if the Republicans squeak in by a couple votes and Boehner becomes Speaker and Issa gets the subpoena power in the Reform Committee, all we're going to see is investigation after investigation instead of legislation, positive or negative?
No, absolutely. I sat on the Judiciary Committee for years with Issa, and it will pale in comparison to what they did when they were in charge and President Clinton was in the White House. Elijah's absolutely right. We have to make sure that people understand that pursuing an agenda and adopting good public policy would be tossed out the window in favor of the Republicans, of what will become the Republican obsession to get Barack Obama. And we've seen it, an insidious campaign through the internet and through right-wing extremist groups, and they will be empowered through the Republican Party if the wrong decisions are made on November 2nd. But I'm confident, I think Elijah's confident, that our candidates, our members, are really doing a very effective job at making the case. They have the resources that they're going to need to have, and we're going to simply out-organize them. That's what we're aiming to do.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to have you on Friday afternoon here. Thank you, Congressman Wasserman Schultz and Congressman Elijah Cummings, sir. Thanks for joining us. Coming